Now, it seemed very appropriate that for the reading today, it should be the first chapter of the Tao Te Ching. And as we'll explore in a moment, the Tao is not a book of dogma, but rather just a book of words that attempt to name the wordless. And really, these words are just a gift to land in your soul as they may, and to bring truth to you as they may. So with that in mind, let me share with you the opening chapter of the Tao Te Ching. A way that can be walked is not the way. A name that can be named is not the name. Tao is both named and nameless. As nameless, it is the origin of all things. As named, it is the mother of all things. A mind free of thought, merged within itself, beholds the essence of Tao. A mind filled with thought, identified with its own perceptions, beholds the mere forms of the world. Tao and this world seem different, but in truth, they are one and the same. The only difference is in what we call them. How deep and mysterious is this unity? How profound, how great is the truth beyond the truth, the hidden within the hidden. It is the path to all wonder and the gate to the essence of everything. So I want to spend the next few minutes taking a tiny dip of the toes into this magnificent text. And as you can probably imagine, there is not any time to begin to do such an incredible work, any justice in 15 minutes or so. So consider this, if you like, an amuse-bouche. And I'm excited to bring it to you at this time because it's something that is with me always. I travel the world with a copy of the Tao. It's had a huge impact on my life. Quite apart from the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, it's not a religious text. It is just a tiny, if you like, a crack in a window so that you're able to peer through and see universal truth in such a simple and yet profound way. It's just 81 chapters or verses. You could read it in an afternoon, or you could read it for a lifetime. And so important is it to me that, and part of my spiritual journey, especially in interfaith, that my stole, which I don't know if you can see here, but I decided that on my clavicle, I would have two of the characters from the Tao Te Ching, one representing all things that are earthly, and the other all things that are beyond the earth, the universal. That's how important it was for me, because I wanted to carry a symbol of my love and respect for this incredible work. As you will see in a moment, and for those of you who've read it, it's a baffling text, and it's full of paradoxes and parables and opposites. But it's there for a reason, because there in the creative tension lies the truth. And it's ours to allow that creative tension to lead us somewhere out beyond our own limited thinking. According to Taoist principles, a true Taoist is one who relaxes the body, calms the mind, and loosens the grip of categories that we have from habit of naming. It's a non-dual text. There is no right and wrong, bad or good. It just is. And therefore it allows, as I said earlier, for that, like that reed-like motion in our lives, the fluidity. And instead of doing things such as pondering choices, the Tao teaches, well, let the problems solve themselves. And let spontaneity find its own direction. And if you think of the Tao being like a swimming pool, at the deep end is the mystical, and at the shallow end is self-cultivation. And where you choose to be in that pool is what you will enjoy from the truths that the Tao has. It's strange, it's elusive, but it's truth. And if you are interested, at the end of today, I will put into the chat box the 3 most famous translators of the Tao into English. You can buy their copies of them very easily, very cheaply. And I'm going to be referencing all 3 of them, but I will alert you to the one that has touched me the most, and the one whose translation I sort of resonate with the most. So most of you will probably, if you have read it, likelihood you've read it, Stephen Mitchell's version of it. And the one that I love the most is Jonathan Starr. He's most contemporary. In fact, I met him probably about 10, 15 years ago because I just wanted to sit at his feet and hear what this great sage who had dedicated his life to the Tao had to say. And in preparation for today, I've also woven in a new copy that I have now fallen in love with. It turns out that he's Australian. That's not the reason I chose it, but I just love the way he explores the text. So woven into today are going to be those 3 and their interpretations in English. You can imagine that from a Chinese character, which in it of itself, each one is quite complex. We have to squeeze this universal truth into a tiny English word. It's not a job that it's not for the faint-hearted. Let me put it like that. There are actually just a little over 5,000 texts. Chinese characters that make up the text of the Tao. So before we jump into the truths of it, let me just talk about the alleged author. And I'll explain what I mean by alleged in a moment. But Lao Tzu. So legend has it that Lao Tzu and Confucius met more than once. So that makes them contemporaries of about, again, they're not quite sure of the dates, but I would say 2,500 years would be a good conservative estimate. And it's alleged that Confucius, who was in awe of Lao Tzu and Lao Tzu's understanding of universal principles, referred to him as a dragon, which in Chinese, the Chinese language and the Chinese understanding of spirituality, that is the highest honor that one could ever pay another human being. He said the great man is the dragon. The yang, which has been slowly accumulating, is suddenly transformed, and it attains perfect freedom. The soaring flight is free, effortless, and unhampered. He is the sage, simply taking off, flowing with the Tao naturally and instinctively. Now, Lao Tzu lived in a province in China, and when he realized that this province was beset with one political and empirical problem after another, he decided that was it. He was leaving. He was basically in his soul a hermit. And legend has it that he headed towards the west and he had to go through a mountain pass. And the pass keeper, recognizing him, said, "I will let you pass through, Lao Tzu, but I ask you, sir, please, before you do, could you please write down your truths, your understanding?" And in fact, that's exactly what Lao Tzu did. If you can imagine, 5,000 Chinese characters overnight on 2 pieces of parchment, and then he bid his leave and he disappeared, never to be seen again. Some people think he probably either just disappeared into the ether or went into seclusion, but he left wherever he went and whoever he was, he left the most incredible piece of work that 2,500 years later still speaks powerful truth to who we are and where we find ourselves today. So you can imagine, in preparing for today, I thought, my goodness, how on earth do I do this and put it into such a small amount of time? So what I'm going to do, I chose randomly the number 10. And I'm going to take 10 principles, share with you. I know there are great note takers amongst us, so I'll be reliant on you to feed back the 10 later on. But I will try to number them, and I'll explain wherever possible which verse this truth comes from, or which chapter this truth comes from. And I'm going to finish on my favorite. Now, I don't see Rhoda here today because I know Rhoda loves her goddesses. So Rhoda, if you are listening in later on, the last one, of course, I'm going to dedicate to you and to all goddess lovers. But let's start with, before we jump into number 1, just to tell you that the Tao is very clear on what the traits of a sage. Now, by a sage, of course, it means a follower of the Tao. What 3 traits make up a follower? And they are simply this: humility, moderation, and compassion. And I think as we take this warp speed trip through the Tao and we look at these 10, you'll see these traits popping up as we go along. So the first one is this, and this one is from chapter 53. The great way, or the Tao. So of course the Tao translates into the way, and the Jing is power. So all the time I'm talking, I want you to remember that that's what that is, the juxtaposition of the way and power. And he says, the great way is smooth and easy, yet people prefer the devious side paths. Interesting. Again, that's from verse 53. So basically, he's saying that a better way of life has been around for thousands of years. And the secrets to lasting peace and happiness really aren't a secret. They're just ignored. And of course, today in our modern world, many people think that happiness can be bought or drunk or eaten. And very often, of course, the seeking of quote unquote happiness is quite egoic in its drive. In reality, of course, we are ignoring and smothering the cries of our soul, which would respond so clearly, as he said, and so easily to the way of the Tao. And he said the fix is very simple. Value your inner peace over possessions. Value your relationships over money. Value discipline over immediate gratification. And gather wisdom instead of catching up on the news. Feed your spirit, he says, and you will walk a path of bliss only known to a few. This, he said, is the Tao. Number 2, look inside for life's answers. In verse 5, it says, man was made to sit quietly and find the truth within. Now, of course, wherever you see man, forgive me for stumbling over that pronoun. I do mean, of course, a person. Number 3, what you resist will persist. I'll read that again. What you will resist will persist. In verse 69, he says, when two great forces oppose each other, victory will go to the one that knows how to yield. Number 4, follow life's lead and react accordingly. In other words, and again, back to that symbolism of being the reed in the water, he says in verse 76, a tree that cannot bend will crack in the wind. And the way of the Taoist is to work out those places of resistance, those places where you are unable or unwilling to bend or to yield. Number 5, universal oneness. In verse 13, Lao Tzu says, one who sees themselves as everything is fit to be guardian of the world. Now that sounds quite almost colonial or ego power driven, but that's of course not what Lao Tzu is saying. Lao Tzu is saying, in fact, quite the opposite, very much what, as we know, many of the indigenous traditions know as that, as one of my Aboriginal elder teachers always used to say, I don't own the land owns me. And this is what Lao Tzu is saying. If you see yourself in everything, and by that, everything, then you are at one with the world. And by guardian, in other words, a co-creator. Number 6, inherent goodness. The Tao Te Ching teaches that the infinitely good and eternal source of creation lies where? Within you. And it begins to correct your course the moment you let it. And in essence, what Lao Tzu is saying is, you don't have to try to be a good person. You are, because of that inherent essence within the Jing. Number 7, less is more. 2 beautiful verses, one from verse 9, he says, it's easier to carry an empty cup than one that is filled to the brim. And another one, be content with what you have. Realize that nothing is lacking. If you know when to stop, the whole world belongs to you. And I love that the indigenous people in the Amazon have an unwritten law that you only catch as much fish as you need. And once you've established what you need, you throw the rest back. In other words, an honoring of, I only need what I need. The rest is part of the balance of the ecosystem. and it belongs as much in the water when I don't need it as it does in my belly. Number 8, and I'm sure that this will probably be resonant for most of us here today, but the journey of 1,000 miles. I love this. This is from verse 64. The great pine tree grows from a tiny seedling. A tower starts with a single brick. A journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. And I chose this one because Lao Tzu is basically pointing the finger at, I feel, some of the dreams and aspirations that we've had, whether that be individually or collectively, and that were never acted on. And very often it's because the dream feels too big and unattainable. And that can be quite overwhelming. If you stare at the peak of the mountain from base camp, you wonder how on earth you will ever ascend. Perhaps someone told you that your dream was impossible, and it's easy to choose to believe them. But as Lao Tzu said, no matter how big, how grand, how great the dream, it's just a matter of starting. The rest will take care of itself. And now we're going to get to my final 2. And they're my 2 favorites. And why are they my favorites? So first of all, number 9, the Tao Te Ching talks an enormous amount about governance and the governance, not just of our own lives, but of course, as a nation. And I picked out 5 that I thought might resonate with us here in the world today, with all of its issues and travails and troubles. And imagine, just imagine, if governments were to become Taoist in their essence. Try these on for size. So I've chosen 5. I'd be curious which ones jump out at you. The first one: the more prohibitions you have, the less virtuous people will be. The more weapons you have, the less secure people will be. The second one: can you love and lead people without imposing your will? Can you deal with the most vital matters by letting events take their course? Can you step back from your own mind in order to understand things? The third one: when a country obtains great power, it becomes like the sea. All streams run downward into it. The more powerful it grows, the greater the need for humility. Humility means trusting the Tao, thus never needing to be defensive. The fourth one: a great nation is like a great person. When they make a mistake, they realize it. Having realized it, they admit it. Having admitted it, they correct it. This person considers those who points out one's faults as the most benevolent teachers. They think of the enemy as the shadow that they themselves cast. Wow. And finally, to go back to the analogy of the streams in the sea, all streams flow into the sea because it's lower than they are. Humility is what gives a nation its power. If you want to govern the people, you must place yourself below them. If you want to lead the people, you must learn how to follow them. As I said, imagine a world if governments were to take these Taoist principles, which of course are not law, but just truth. And finally, in closing, I've saved my favorite to the last. And it comes from verse 6. So I think if you're going to dive into the Tao, I would suggest going here, because here is what changed my life and changed my appreciation of the text. But that's not the reason I think anyone else should do it, but simply because it's so affirming of the life's journey that I think it could speak to all. Let me read it. Endlessly creating, endlessly pulsating. The spirit of the valley never dies. She, now interesting that in this verse, Lao Tzu changes from the male pronoun to the female. So a shout out to all the goddess and divine feminine lovers. She is called the hidden creator. Although she becomes the whole universe, her immaculate purity is never lost. Although she assumes countless forms, her true identity remains intact. Whatever we see or don't see, whatever exists or doesn't exist, is nothing but the creation of this supreme power, which is limitless, unborn, eternal. It can only be reached through the hidden creator. She is the very face of the absolute, the gate to the source of all things eternal. Listen to her voice. Hear it echo through creation. Without fail, she reveals her presence. Without fail, she brings us to our own perfection. And I wanted to end with this verse because it's those last two lines that I think put my feet very firmly on the spiritual path towards not only understanding, but healing and consolidating so many of these things that I'd learned through life, suddenly all kind of interconnected. So I'm going to read them again. Without fail, she reveals her presence. Without fail, she brings us to our own perfection. In other words, this journey we call life is this movement, this endless pulsating, pushing us towards our wholeness. And let it be so. Thank you for listening. I can't possibly squeeze such an enormous body of work into such a small amount of time, but I hope I've done justice to it. Thank you so much.
If you like this video, please like us on YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and click on the bell to be notified whenever we post a new video. Thank you.